Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. This is episode number 521, being recorded on June 9th, 2025. Joined with all the regulars,
All of
uh,
us.
everybody today. Kind of a special show because a little bit of a wrap up here on the Azure Podcast. And so we kind of wanted to talk about, how this thing got started and how it's kind of progressed and grown over the years. And here we are now. Maybe towards the end of that journey, kind of wrapping things up here for where we've come. So I'll go ahead and just say, hey, when we got started, it was just me and Sujit, and I was in a different role at that time. I think probably everybody was that's on this
I'm
podcast,
back
but
in a similar role, but yeah,
yeah,
technically,
well, there's
12
been an
years.
evolution.
Yeah, there's a lot of different changes.
So it was I don't know the month somebody do it, but it's 2013 is when we started. Is
Yeah,
it later in the year? But when we started at that point, Azure had been out a few years, but the services inside Azure were exploding, and I don't mean in a bad way. I mean many of them.
October
And
of 2013.
there you go. And at that time, a lot of the issue was with Azure is getting the word out that about Service X, right? Because it was growing so fast and things were happening so quickly. Even us inside Microsoft were finding it hard to keep up, right? And so I mentioned to Sujit, or we talked together and said, hey, we should do a little podcast to talk about the new services because it seems like every week there's a new one. And let's talk a little bit about them. And then, things kind of evolve from that point. But that's how the thing actually got started. And I'll go ahead and open it up to others. Sajit, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. That's a good way to get started here. I remember I was listening to a podcast about this thing called Amazon Web Services. Okay, and I was like, hey, it's a nice way to learn about Amazon AWS. I actually thought it was very useful. And I looked around, I was like, oh, surprisingly, we have nothing for Azure. Why is that? Like, it's such a good format, short shows, and within like just a few couple of weeks, I felt I was very knowledgeable about AWS, and so then Cale and I connected. I was like, hey, we need to do something like this for
Y'all,
Azure.
y'all
It
knew each
doesn't
other at the
exist.
time, right? You didn't meet through the show, right? I
Correct.
think you were both in consulting or something at the time, right?
Correct. We were both
Yeah.
in the same team in MCS at the time.
Hmm.
So yeah, for sure, we connected and we said, let's just get it started. And those were early days in Azure, and also just getting this thing sort of created. Like, how do we create not only the show, but how do we publish the show? How do we record it? All of there was so many questions we had to have. These were very early days in podcasting. I know these days podcasting seems like everyone is got a podcast going for them, but in those days it was a very niche thing, right? Podcasting, and there wasn't any a ready-made platform to publish a podcast. You had to kind of roll your own. So there was a lot of interesting and good challenges at the time, and yeah, I'm
I
glad
think
Cale and I connected and we got that going.
I think we even used Skype to begin with, right,
We
Sajit?
did. We had that. Remember, we had that add-in for Skype that
Yeah,
was a
we had
little
a
Yeah.
finicky
Skype
once in a while.
recording add-in. Yes.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
unfortunately, that did not record a show one time, and we had to re-record the show
yeah,
as a result.
yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting times.
I remember, so I joined y'all in episode 5, and full transparency, we all had to look up our start dates on the show because it's been so long. But I joined y'all in episode 5, and if my memory is right, I think I reached out. I think I saw y'all show somewhere. I don't even remember where. Maybe one of the internal discussion groups or something, and reached out and said, hey, happy to do an IaaS thing because I had just moved to the IaaS team from the Azure SQL team. And I honestly don't remember how the conversation went where I sort of transitioned from a guest to a host, but I do remember we used to script the shows. We would talk about like what we were going to ask and what the topics were. And man, I don't know about y'all, but these days, the last couple of years, like I'm lucky if I know the guest that's coming before I show up.
And you're the
Yeah, I
one who
mean,
invited them.
Yeah, sometimes.
yeah, but when we first started, we didn't have any guests on the show. We were
Yeah,
the
yeah, it was
guests,
just
Yeah.
right?
us. Yeah,
It was just us, and we wanted to talk about a different topic in Azure every episode, right? We said, okay, we thought maybe we'll get through 20 episodes and then we'll run out of material, right? Because there were
yeah,
only so many services in Azure. But so it forced us. We had to kind of upskill ourselves on each of those
yeah.
topics, and
I
then
remember
so
that.
that we could
Yeah.
talk about it in a somewhat meaningful way. And then and then after that, I guess that the word got out, and we started getting people joining us on the show, other people, so we didn't have to. It wasn't just us on the show.
Yeah, and then
How did
Russ.
that first
Oh,
conversation happen? For like, did someone ask if they could be a guest? Or did one day you're like, oh, we should ask some PM to or some engineer to come on?
that's a good question. I'm going back through to see when we sort of transitioned to guest, but if I had to guess, it was just somebody reaching out to some PM they knew.
I think initially, Evan, we started reaching out to some of the people, right? We were we
Yeah,
were, we were getting colleagues, people who had experience in certain
Ryan
Azure.
Berry was our first guest. It looks like episode 18.
Yep, there you go. And I think you brought in Ryan. I believe he was a
Yeah, I
connection
knew him.
through.
I think I knew him as a what became a cloud solution architect or something, a role similar to that.
Right. So
So
we
Evan,
yeah.
just when you mentioned about don't know when that transition happened between guest and being a co-host. So my story about when I joined, which was back in episode 113, 2016. I was listening to the show for a year or so before coming on and doing that episode, but in my previous job as well. So I joined Microsoft, and I'm now just celebrating 10 years of being at Microsoft. So there's a bit of symmetry here as well. But I remember reaching out to Sujit because I had a chance to go to America over on a flight to our Tech Ready conference, and I had a chance to go and meet Sujit. So I reached out to him and said, "Oh, can I meet up? Just say hello and thank you for the podcast because I found it really valuable. I used to commute to work every day. Can't even remember those days now. That's a strange concept." But yeah, I reached out to him, and then we met up at the conference. And first thing he did was stuck a microphone under my mouth and started asking me questions. And I was like, "Oh, hello, Sujit. This is a bit strange." So anyway, asked me all about my role, my job, what I was doing, and that became the episode. And then afterwards, Sujit just kindly enough just asked me if I wanted to be the UK correspondent on the show. So yeah, thanks for that. And I've enjoyed every moment of it, but yeah, it's like I say, a bit of a symmetry because I'm coming to the end of my Microsoft career now as well. So I'm working my notice period. So I'll be leaving Microsoft on the 8th of August for pursuing my next step in my career.
And I'm trying to remember. So Cale, Sujit, you and I met in person once because you worked around the corner from my dad, and I was staying with my dad who'd had some surgery. Cale, did we end up at one of the Microsoft corporate events together, something like Build or one of those?
Tech Ready or Build or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Kendall, I don't think you and Cynthia and I and Russell have ever been together in the same room, have we?
I don't think so. No.
I don't think so.
Not all at once. No, I think I've met.
Yeah, I think we've had sort of
individually, but
pieces.
yeah.
People have ended up with groups, but I mean, we certainly have never had all six of us together. That requires way more coordination than we're able to do. But it's funny because you talk about the changes, Russell. Like, I've had 3 or 4 different roles. Cale, you've moved organizations. Sujit, I think you've shifted again now, but Russell, you're getting ready to leave. Cynthia, you and Kendall left. Cynthia, you went back to school and are now back working again. And then Kendall, you're with a third party not Data Grid.
Diagrid, close though.
IOGrid, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
super close. No,
Yeah.
okay.
It's neat seeing it's been really fun, at least for me, to sort of watch the work and personal transitions as everybody's going. But we've always had this constant throughout of it of, we got a show, right? And hang out with y'all and just get to have some fun.
Cynthia, when I think you and I had worked together, right, as well, and that's how you got into the show. You came into the
I
show.
think because I started in 2017 in Las Colinas, and you were in Las Colinas then, and I think we met at the office, and we
Right.
were in the same like, oh my God, domain. That was
Right.
what they were called back
Right.
then.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
Kendall was in that domain as well.
Yes.
And I don't know if we like actually worked together or we were just like there at the office together.
Probably something like that.
And
Yeah.
and then I definitely we had a conversation, and I think you're very kind. You're all like, "Oh, how's it going? Joining Microsoft. Like, if there's anything I can help with, let us know," and all of that. And I still remember, like, I think you messaged me on Skype afterwards. And initially, my understanding was like, oh, do I want to come on as a guest? Because Kendall just did a episode not too long ago. So I was like, okay, this is my understanding. And I was like, cool,
Sucked you in. False
I can talk
pretenses.
about myself for 30 minutes. And then Suji was like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I meant like, do you want to come on as a host? And I was like, I would love to, but I also don't know any of the things we're about to talk about. But it's great. I can ask questions. That's what I can do. And yeah, I think like Evan was saying, for me, it was like a whole. It was like how I grew up as well in entering. I don't know, entering the my career at Microsoft. And I think that thread also helped me with a lot of my career transition during the time at Microsoft, because um, it gave me a very different perspective that other people don't
Yeah.
usually have. I think it's
Mhm.
such a privilege to be able to have these like one-off touch points with so many different people
Mhm.
across so many
Agreed.
different organizations. And because I was in a customer facing role, like I was selfishly very happy because now I know if I have problems, I know like exactly who to talk to
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
can get an answer very quickly.
Yeah,
It does wonders for your network for sure. It did for me
It's
as well.
amazing.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know
Cynthia's
about
like,
y'all,
hey,
but one of
let's
oh,
let's
sorry,
talk
go ahead,
about
Cale.
storage. Let's talk about storage because I need to know about it. Like,
Yeah, I feel like
I
Evan
think
was
I
always
think
like, who
Sajid
can
was
I
probably
bring
most
on to help me
notorious for
answer some
that. Yeah.
questions? Yeah.
I got this project coming up on this thing. We should have somebody on from this.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
Kendall, I think, yeah, as Cynthia was saying, you were initially a guest on the show, right? We
Yeah. I mean, and Sajit, like once again, I just want to echo like Cynthia's sentiments. Like I think we both are really grateful because I think you played like a very important role for both of us, and like including us and creating space for younger voices and female voices on the podcast. So like just want to say thank you for, I feel like a lot of times in my career at Microsoft personally, I had a lot of people advocating for me and like creating room for me to learn and grow. And when I joined the podcast, it was episode 208. So this is 2017. I remember exactly where I was. I was working in a co-working space in Dallas, right? Like I'm a little over a year into my career. And I remember talking about on that podcast, I joined Microsoft through the college hire program, and I saw a mini data center in the Charlotte office, and I did not know what virtual machines were when I
And that, by the
started
way,
in
Kendall, that
2016.
kills me that in hindsight you were in Charlotte at one point and we didn't
I
didn't know enough
so
yet at the
wild.
point to get together. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so wild. But yeah, to me it is truly like insane to look back not only on that episode, but Sajit, like us making that connection when I was still once really new to Azure. Like when I joined that podcast, virtual machines, and I didn't even know what containers were probably when we had that episode. And now 7 or 8 years later, I've like become truly like an expert in this space, and I've evolved so much. And I do feel like the podcast was a huge like precipice to me ending up getting an opportunity to join a more like Azure centric team, because I was able to prove that I had been learning and upskilling in this area and a lot. And I think that's relevant for all of us, like, and everyone in the industry now, is that so much of this is self teaching. Like so much of keeping up with this industry is taking the initiative to learn something new. And so I feel like every episode for us was a catalyst for us to learn a little bit more about another topic and also like evangelize that knowledge with other people as well. And so yeah, I mean there's so many episodes I look back on and think like, oh wow, I would have never really known about that particular thing if this hadn't been a bit of that conduit for me to do that. So yeah, I'm feeling a little like Cinty, aka sentimental, right now. But like it is kind of wild. Like 2017 was a long time ago. I mean, I was fresh out of college and now I've been in the industry for almost 10 years. Like I was at Microsoft for 5, I've been at the startup for 2. So it's yeah, it's really, really cool. And I was thinking about one thing I'm thinking about right now is all the effort. I want to say thank you to like Sujit, Evan, Cale, Russell. I know Cynthia and I haven't been maybe as involved in like finding guests in most recent years. I know for me, I can say that as someone who hasn't been on Microsoft. But thanks for all the effort y'all put into like keeping this podcast going, because it is a lot of effort. And it is kind of wild now. We are in a day and age where like we can basically make podcasts and have fake people talking to each other over like a proposal. Like genuinely at Diagram,
Yeah.
one thing we're doing is we're literally taking proposals that someone has written, and you can generate a podcast where people are talking about it like
with the AI,
in podcast form. And it's not always been that simple. And so I appreciate
we are
all
all
the effort
real
that went
here,
into
just
this.
to prove, just to make
like,
it clear, if it wasn't,
yeah.
we're all
Real.
real.
Yeah, and I will say those podcasts not as entertaining and not as fun to watch as us. So like I'm sad, but yeah, it's really cool to be able to look back and see how many amazing episodes have happened, and this knowledge is going to live beyond just like new episodes being created, because so much of this is so fundamental and still super relevant because we've covered so much. So yeah.
And I do want to, you mentioned it, so I want to pile on this a little bit. Sujit, you and Russell have historical. Okay, yeah, I think you did a few for sure. And I think Cynthia, you might have done some as well. But Russell, you and Sujit have been sort of the backbone of the technical underpinnings of taking the recordings and getting the site going, and doing the video editing. Oh my God, I did that once, and I just wanted to gouge my eyes out. Especially it was one show where we had to edit a whole bunch because marketing got involved, and never doing that again. But like y'all have done a great, the ability, y'all have done a great job on that, and even taught me some things, right? The AI summarization that you suggested for the blurbs. I used to stress about, okay, I got to send the, I got to remember to, get headshots and write the blurb and all that, and then now it's just AI does the blurb for me. It's just easy. It's great.
But
it's so cool to think about how we wrote that ourselves.
Yeah.
In the beginning, and now we don't. And that tool wasn't available before.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Well, not a lot was available before, was it? I mean, going back to 2013, Azure was it wasn't a very broad service. There was stuff on there.
It was cloud, it was all the PaaS stuff. That was about it. Azure SQL and cloud services and all that.
Do you remember
IS
ASM?
Was new. Yeah. What's that?
ASM, everything was ASM. And then we moved on.
The old service manager or service. Yeah, Azure Service Manager architecture was there. We had just launched IS. Well, that's why I came on the show the first time, right? It was because I had moved to help start launch the IS support team, and so I was pretty early into the IS space, and we were trying to get some press at that point for the product and stuff. But yeah, it was brand spanking new. IS was in 2013. Sure.
Something you mentioned there, Evan, too, is the marketing thing. So a couple things I think Sujit kind of helped make sure we keep doing this. So we experimented over the years of like, hey, maybe we should do video, like let's see what that's like, And so we tried that. And when I say video, not like kind of what we do today, which we could talk about in a second, but it was more like maybe it should be more like people do presentation, have like a diagram they could talk through. And I think it was only a few episodes we did, and we said, okay, let's experiment with that.
Like, that doesn't work.
And then feedback from the community was, I listen to this when I'm in the gym or walking or something. It's terrible if you have video. Stop doing it. Like so.
Do you remember we did a couple of live episodes as well? I think there was one on Twitter live, and there was one on something else as well.
Yeah.
The build or whatever it was a live episode.
Yeah.
And actually, and I have to confess, this is going to show how horrible a co-host I am. I think we lost one of those episodes, and I found the recordings like 5 years later in the bottom of a suitcase. And I looked at him and said, is it worth back publishing? No. And I think I told y'all that I found them, but we never did like go back and do anything with it. I still have them. They're probably on
the
USB
SD card
somewhere.
You found the SD card.
Yeah, it was the SD card, and it was one of the little mini ones that it like fell in a corner of the bag, and like I just didn't find it. I felt so awful.
Was that
as
the
a
time
as a
that
build
you
episode,
and me and one of my colleagues came over and we had a booth, we had a podcast
Yep.
booth at the build?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we didn't have a booth. Oh yeah,
It was
no,
like
we
a
did. You're
table.
right. We
I
had
thought it
like
was
a
like a
little
table,
corner.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there were other podcasters
That's it.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. So you and I were in person once. You're right. I do remember that now.
I
'Cause
remember all
having
the, all the
breakfast
kit
with
they
you.
had set up there, and
Yeah.
it was just, I mean, compared to what we do now, we
I was like, their
just plug in a
equipment are
microphone.
so hardcore because I think Kendall and Sujit and I went to a build together.
Yeah.
And we
Yes,
got
we did
access to
one.
the podcast room, and there were things we've never seen before. And they gave us instructions of like, do this, and when this happened, we will start recording, and then we'll like mix the sounds.
Oh,
and
that
we're
sounds
like,
so complicated.
okay.
And you know who was managing that entire show was Carl Franklin. He was.
I don't know Carl's name.
Carl Franklin is from the .NET Rocks. He's like the.
Okay. Okay.
Big
He's
not-
like one of the original
I'm not a big
podcasters, I
listener
would say.
outside of our show.
And-
I saw him Ready like 2 weeks ago. I was at Microsoft Build in Seattle like a couple
you
weeks
saw him,
ago.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's also just like always, it's cool that I'm still involved in the Microsoft community a lot and that I get to go to these conferences like through my work. But Russell, I was just thinking, you and I also did an in-person podcast with Sean McKenna, and that was in 2019. So I almost kind of forgot about that. But yeah, we've done a couple, I guess, in-person shows.
That was
at
about
this
AKS,
point.
wasn't it? I think.
Yeah,
AKS,
that was
yeah.
an AKS
Yeah, Sean,
talk.
he was
and-
the PM. Yeah.
I
And
remember
think
doing
he
a couple with
still
Donovan
works on
Brown
AKS,
live
I
as well.
think.
Yeah, I think that was the show you and I did live at the Build or whatever that event was, because
Yeah, that
Donovan
was
was there.
Build.
Yeah.
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 The
Yeah.
other thing with that was, the marketing thing you mentioned, Evan. So Sajid's been pretty hard about this, and thank God, because, working at a big company like Microsoft, if you say, hey, I want to put something out there publicly, 37 people need to review it and like change everything by the time it gets out, and it was like, yeah, we don't want to do that. Like, how can we get around that like a little bit,
But we forgot to mention that, right? The premise of the show has always been, sort of it's self-hosted, self-funded. I don't know what the right word, but it's not. It's never been an official show. It's been something we've all done in our, spare time and independently. Even though a chunk of us were Microsoft or all of us were at the time, like it was always something that was a little bit separate, right, from the work persona.
But I remember, I think it was you, Evan, or maybe it was Sajid. I can't remember. I have an email from Scott Guthrie.
Oh,
right?
that was me. Yeah.
And
I
he was
pinged
like-
Scott about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I know about this." He gave us a thumbs up. It's like, okay,
Yeah, but it
that made
wasn't
it
like
official in
like,
my
"Oh,
mind.
what are you guys doing over there? Like, we need to make sure." It was more like, this is awesome. I love these grassroots things that people come up with. So yeah.
Yep.
But I wanted to kind of mention one thing about, especially because this is the Azure Podcast, and when we first deployed this, the podcast platform, we deployed it on Azure, of course, and we deployed it using 3 services, actually 2 initially. So it's just an app service, right, which hosts the main website and the RSS feed, and a storage for all our MP3 files, right? So that's what listeners get to listen to, and we deployed them like 13 years ago, and they're both working flawlessly after 13 years. Okay. We had only one problem in 13 years on the app service, and that was because we ran out of space. I had to bump up the tier to the next available SKU. We were on the basic SKU. I think I went up to the whatever the next level up was, and that was it. That was the only problem we had. So, a testament to Azure, right? For 13 years, service remains up and running, doesn't change. We didn't have to change anything. Even the code that's running the podcast is using like an old blog engine. It's a .NET based blog engine, which is still running after 13 years. It's and never updated it. So
just about running. I mean, it's showing its age a little bit.
It's
not
showing
quite
its age a little
cutting edge
bit.
user experience, is it? But it does the job. You're right.
It does the job. Yeah. I can't really tweak it too much in terms of UX and whatnot, but it keeps on going. So we added one more thing, which was the Azure automation.
Got around to it.
Yeah, we did add Azure automation to it. So the counter that shows the number of downloads every week was an extra piece that we added. So those are the 3 services that we've had for the longest time. and
They
it's
just work.
worked flawlessly. Yeah.
Your mention about the downloads reminds me, by the way, if y'all saw me drop out, it's because we're still low tech enough that I had a little technical glitch there when I tried to change the microphone and it kicked me out of Teams. But at one point, I think I was going back and looking, we were on the order of 60,000 downloads a month coming through off the podcast stuff. And that's with no marketing. That's just sort of being out there and doing it. I don't know about y'all, but when we started doing it on YouTube, it shows up in my YouTube subscriptions, on the TV. And man, my wife just loves to give me grief about, having a podcast. She just utterly loves, every time there's like an SNL skit about old white guy with a podcast, she just thinks it's hilarious.
The photo that shows up, it's my original photo from 2013 as well on there. And I was going to say I had hair back then, but I didn't. And I still don't have hair. So. But it always gives you a bit of a shock when you see yourself on TV, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It's
my
bad enough
mom-
hearing your voice sound different, but then now looking at how you actually look and move, yeah, it's bad.
My mom
It's
will
bad.
occasionally tell me, "Oh, I just you just popped up on my TV," because she also watches YouTube on her TV, and it suddenly comes up. I don't know how she got connected to it in the first place, but she keeps an eye on the podcast too, apparently.
I think my mom does too now. I don't know if she still listens to it anymore. She used to for a while. I don't have to ask her if she still does. That's hilarious.
Also, something I remember about like downloads and listenership. I think during the time we went to build in person, I was gonna ask the CTO at Azure if he would come on the podcast, and I followed up with him afterwards, and he respectfully turned it down because our audience was too small.
Which is crazy.
So
But
this
we've had
was, when was this, Cynthia, roughly?
2019 maybe.
Because we had Girish Bablani on.
Yep.
I don't have to go back and look. I mean, it's been the last couple of years because it was I don't know, for show 450 or something like that. It was one of our big shows. And I didn't even bat an eye at that point. So maybe we had grown at that point. So that would have been what, 2022, 2023, somewhere in that range, something like that.
I did get agreement from Scott Guthrie once to appear on the show, but I think I think it was the manner in which I asked him. I kind of cornered him. He was hosting. Well, I was hosting with him a roundtable event in London, and I managed to corner him at a point where we were both together, which was just as he was coming out of the toilets, the gents. And I think I caught him off guard a little bit, and he said, "Yeah, I'll do that, whatever." And obviously, I followed up with his PA, and nothing came of it. But there you go. I tried.
Probably to lose the guy's number.
Like, get away from me.
Lose that number. No, I don't want to hear from that person.
It is
that's
kind of
hilarious.
cool, like just looking at I'm looking at our YouTube page, and it's so cool how many of these people I recognize, whether it's like old colleagues or people who like I looked up to. Like we've just had so many cool guests on the show who have either become like Cynthia, you mentioned you met so many different people, and it's crazy like looking at these. Also, like my hair changed, like my hair color, my hair length, my desk location. I've lived in 4 different places. Like it really is crazy to like see these little just icons of us and like think about how many things have changed, both like career wise and just like physical location, age, like all of that. So it's kind of shocking to be able to see it all in like such a quick snippet,
Yeah.
Yeah, and Cynthia's got her own startup going now.
I know.
and she went from California to Spain, back to California, and out to the UK. It's like world traveler.
She,
That's
I'd like to point
pretty
out,
awesome.
she keeps going. She keeps flying right above me and never stops. Actually, for Sujit, you and Cale as well, right? Oh, hi.
Exactly.
Just wait.
We don't need to speak to those guys. We're gonna fly right over them.
So, I don't know about y'all, but I occasionally will run into a listener at like a customer call or even an internal call, and someone pings, "Hey, I thought I recognized that voice," and it always feels a little bit embarrassing, sort of. I mean, I don't know about y'all,
You
because
don't feel special? You feel embarrassed?
well, not
Why?
embarrassing, not a negative embarrassing. Like
Mhm.
they start going on about, oh, you're the podcast person, and I listen to you all the time, and I mean, I'm about y'all, but I sort of like, really, you want to listen to me all the time, like that. It's that kind of embarrassing. It's
Have
not
you not
like I'm
been
not
charging
embarrassed
for
about the
selfies and
show.
autographs like all the rest of us?
You got to get your merch line working, man.
Yeah, I need to. That
No,
retirement
I
thing's
I,
coming up.
I agree though,
Along
Evan.
this,
Like, no, go ahead,
go ahead,
Cale. I'll
Kendall.
go after you.
No, go ahead, Kendall.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I agree. Like, there's like a little bit of like bashfulness, maybe. Like,
Yeah.
I've been on calls where like someone will recognize me, or someone will ping me and be like, "Hey, I really appreciate your content," or it's made like a big difference. And it's a little bit like, oh my goodness, I know that we're doing this, and I know
Yeah.
people are downloading it, but it still kind of feels like it's
It's sort
going
of
into
that
the void of
disconnect
like,
between we're doing it regardless of whether, at least for me, I don't really care
regardless
if
of
anybody
who's
listens.
listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's lots of people
Yeah.
that do, right? I mean, it's really kind of amazing from that sense. I mean,
But
I'm very humbled to have been able to do it. Just that we were doing it sort of for fun, and it turned into something that people value, right? Like that's really cool to think about that.
I do
similar
want to.
story to that. One day, this was years back. I went to London, of all places. It was London, and I met this guy Daniel. Um, and I was doing like a session or something on Azure with a bunch of people there on something, some customers and stuff. And Daniel was there, and like he introduced me to this room. Like I walked this room, didn't know any of these people at all, like just like cold. And he's like, I can't believe you're here. Like we all listen to the podcast. I'm like, what? Like you guys listen to the same thing? I'm like, you guys listen to that? Like, and he's like, I was like, well, you should just come on the show then. They're like, really? Then I was like, yeah, you should come on the show. Then they come on the show and put it all over Twitter and everything. I remember that time. And it was just amazing. And same thing. You're like, I can't believe you guys listen to that. Like, the same thing. Like we record it. I don't go back and listen to them because I was there
Yeah.
live. And
Yeah.
then I just
Yeah.
move on with my life. And then later, like people are, oh, I can't believe that episode. I'm like, I can't believe people listen to that. Like,
Yeah, like
So
in addition to losing like a slight bit of fame, sad, because obviously we want to be iconic. So I am sad, we're not going to hear, people aren't going to be actively, stopping me on the
Yeah.
street to get
Yeah. Yeah.
selfies anymore. But in addition to that, the thing I'm really going to miss outside of connecting with all of you is just getting those emails from all of the random people who have found me through the
Yeah.
podcast and are sending me spam emails about ways they want to optimize our podcast. So I'm really going to miss those people. I'm going to miss
Those are
giving
great,
them.
aren't they? Those are awesome. Yeah.
I think, given that we're going to leave a massive hole in everybody's listening entertainment for, catching up on Azure and all the rest of it, what are there any other podcasts out there that you guys would recommend as a sort of a go-to for Azure info?
I don't know if y'all
God,
saw
that's
this.
that's a
I don't know
tough
if y'all saw this,
question.
but there's a new Azure podcast that just got launched in January. I literally found this today because I typed in Azure podcast when I was looking for our website. And so I'm just going to share this really quick. It says introducing Leading the Shift, a new Microsoft Azure podcast. And it says basically that Leading the Shift is going to talk about it's going to have customers, partners, Microsoft experts, and other leaders to share journey and insights. I think probably, I'm sure it'll be around like AI, data, that kind of stuff. But that's interesting. I haven't listened to any of the episodes, but looking at it, it does seem like they're dropping episodes like pretty frequently. It looks like they've had them going up until like May 27th. They did software development as an act of empathy. Can AI make the world of art more accessible? AI and analytics on the basketball court with the NBA. So that at least sounds like an interesting Azure related podcast, probably not as relevant to just like upskilling on specific services.
I mean, that
but
looks like, I'm looking at that site. That is like serious, like official, like they've got
Like
4
marketing
episodes
investment.
planned
They get, yeah,
out.
like they
Like,
get all
Yeah.
37 approvals before it gets published.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind
yeah,
of AI focus, and I think if listeners want to find out about more generic Azure topics, because Azure Fridays, I think, was a popular one, and then more recently, I think it's Scott Hanselman and Mark Russinovich kind of
yeah.
do this
That's the
vibe
Fridays
coding
one,
thing.
right? You said.
Well, they do like this like a vibe coding thing, where they try to code things online in a podcast format. So there is Yeah, and then of course for Azure DevOps, for all the other subsidiaries, there's many
Yeah.
podcasts, right? But in terms of
Yeah.
core Azure, I think something like Azure Fridays is probably the best source of information.
Mhm.
And
does look like
we'll
there's
keep the
I don't know.
podcast up and running. All the content will be there. We're not going to take it down. So
Yeah.
people can continue listening to it at least for a few more years.
Yeah, it looks like there's also one called Let's Talk Azure, and once again they've been consistent. They're on season 6, and their last one was May 30th. So it does look like they cover kind of specific things like Microsoft updates in April and new product releases and insight into Microsoft Secure. So I'm sure there's some good stuff there. I also recommend use some of these apps. Go take the AI Foundry docs and literally just say make this into a podcast for me. That's one thing that's kind of cool that you can do is like, if you're filling a gap and you want to learn about a specific service, I do kind of recommend some of those ways where you can actually generate some of that yourself, at least while there's a gap. If someone's not doing that already.
It will not be the same. Let's just be clear.
It won't be the
same.
The AI podcast just doesn't have the charm that we have. And I think that's going to be hard to replicate. That's going to be hard to replicate. You can take my job, but you can't take my personality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a key point. Like if people are thinking about starting their own podcast, for example, I strongly recommend it. Like you'll get all the benefits we talked about here. You'll get good connections. You'll help you keep up to date with some technology or some topic. Keep it focused. Like don't try to get too broad. Like stay in your zone, in your area, and make sure you have other listeners, other co-hosts. I think that's been very key to making this work, right?
Yeah, that's huge.
Because not all
of
us are able to.
Over who's showing up every week.
Not everyone. You sometimes you can't commit to doing it every week. There's always somebody who can cover for you. So that's definitely another approach. And get multiple people on the show, because nobody wants to listen to just one or two people ramble. Sometimes it's helpful to have a few different voices. So that's the thing I would recommend to folks. And nowadays there's so many platforms for podcasting. You don't have to create your own like we did 13 years ago. So it's a small fee you pay, and you get all the bells and whistles on a sort of a podcast platform. It kind of automatically does what we had to do the hard way. We had to figure out how to just get it on Spotify, on Apple iTunes, on Xbox Music at the time, and all of those. Now you just single click and it does all of that for you.
I think the other thing, like in terms of like not like bloopers, but something that probably our listeners don't see that much because we don't publish this piece, but something that always happens with these podcasts, and everybody here knows this because they've done as a host. We'll have somebody on and we set ground rules. Like we learned that over time. It wasn't like when we first started, we're like, okay, just come on and talk about this thing. Give us like level 100. We'll talk a little bit, and then that's it, right? And then it was like people want to know like what exactly should I talk about. So there was a little bit of there, but then it was like the afterwards. It was always like, hey, by the way, when it ends, we're recording this. Just don't drop off because we want to talk to you about a couple
like
things.
Like 60% of people drop
every time. People just like gone. Like then we have to.
I don't know about y'all. Speaking of that, like some of the behind the scenes stuff, like the OneNote we've got where we sort of keep our new releases and everything for the publishing. There's that one page that says these are the things to go through during the show. I'm not lying. Every time I have to do the intro, I am stressed and I'm going to forget the date or the episode number or which hosts are with me. And then the things to go through with the guests, I literally pull that up every time to make sure I don't forget. You'd think after 540 previous episodes, I'd remember that stuff. I just don't. I am so stressed about doing that intro and stuff, but not until then. Like up to it, I'm fine, but then it's when the record button goes on, it's a little bit more stressful as far as leading that.
I think the worst thing is when you've recorded quite a long one and the guest somewhere in the middle has dropped a little bit. Maybe it's a minute's worth of content that is under NDA or shouldn't come out because it's roadmap and it's not public information. So somebody, it's usually Sujit, has to go through and edit the audio file and then the YouTube file and all the rest of it. So that's a real pain.
But some of the
we've not had many people swearing either, have we? I think we've had one or two where
the couple, but yes.
We should have had a little bit more of that just to keep things a little bit spicy. But I'll keep that in mind for my next podcast.
We need to have a content rating on YouTube, so we couldn't like. There were
a couple.
Did we have to set one at some point?
I had to say that it was not safe for children. Otherwise, there's additional things you have to. Yeah.
So feedback I've gotten, by the way, on the Evan, you saying like kicking off the podcast, saying it's episode
Yeah.
whatever. Some people don't take this the wrong way, Sujit, because it's awesome. But Sujit used to like, I don't think he does it as much anymore, but he did there for a while. Like he was like, I don't know if he had it recorded, but he'd be like, "Welcome back to the Azure Podcast." Like he had this great voice, and it was perfect.
Yeah.
Like it was great, but people would be like, "He sounds a little bit like a game show
Well,
host kicking
that's
off
the
something."
intro,
There, like
right? That's the
like-
intro that we stick on
I-
the beginning of it, right?
I tried to keep that consistent over
Yeah.
at least the first 10 seconds. After that,
It's
it went
amazing.
off the
It's
rails.
amazing, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Because I'm terrible at it. I'll be like, yeah, what do we do? Episode?
Me too. I'm horrible. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, y'all, this has been great to see everybody. Definitely let's not lose touch.
Yeah.
It's been such a privilege to work with y'all have fun with y'all for the last 10 years.
Play. We play together.
Play with y'all.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. And so, it's been such great. We're stopping not for bad reasons, but just for good reasons. We feel like it's not needed, and we all got stuff going on, and so, but it's been awesome. Been great getting to know everybody and having fun every week.
Yeah, and if you're a listener and you're huge fans of us, since apparently there are at least one or two, don't be a stranger, If you have questions, I know a lot of us are still very much in this space. So whether it's LinkedIn or whatever, Twitter or X, whatever, Blue Sky, I think a lot of us have profiles on those. So don't be a stranger and keep in touch, because we want to
Absolutely.
be able to keep helping.
We'll
how
put
we can.
we'll put a tip jar in the podcast notes for this one.
Thank
Feel
you.
free to
That was
contribute there
coming
too.
up next. Exactly. We're now going to prorate the payment of all of these free episodes. There's about how many? 519. So $1 a person per episode. Feels fair.
Yeah.
Seems right. About
Yeah,
right.
it seems fair. Awesome. Great. Well, y'all,
Well-
it's been awesome. Greatly appreciated. So glad we could get together for one last show.
Yeah, and best of luck, Cynthia, Russell, and Kendall. Yeah, the rest of us will hopefully still be in touch internally. But yeah, best of luck to all of you in your roles, and best of luck to your startup, Cynthia, and Kendall. Of course, you're doing great things at Diagrid, and Russell in your new role as well. So
Thank you.
see you
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely. Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
everyone.
Thanks,
Don't
everyone.
drop. Don't drop
Don't
because we got to do
drop,
some
don't
post-show
drop.
stuff.
Oh, we did headshots. Hang on.
Okay, can I do a screenshot and take a picture of all of us in the grid
Sure.
so that we have it? Okay. I think I got it. Okay, everyone smile.
You're now